There was a time I stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back at me. Not because I had changed, but because the world had convinced me that what I saw wasn't enough. I listened to voices that weren't mine, voices that told me I was too different, too broken, too behind, too not like the rest. They were loud, so loud, and I believed them. I believed the lie that value comes from what you look like, what you have, or who claps for you. Who claps for you. There's a kind of freedom that only comes when you stop chasing people's approval and start learning how to adore the person you already are. She spent years editing herself, shrinking her opinions, diluting her light, contorting her truth to be palatable. She wanted to be liked. But being liked is such a fragile reward. It's rooted in their comfort, not your authenticity. One day she just got tired. Tired of smiling when she wanted to scream. Tired of apologizing for her dreams. Tired of waiting for permission to be proud of herself. So she made a radical decision to like herself, even when no one else clapped. That changed everything. When you stop performing and start loving yourself, your real, raw, radiant self, you stop settling for scraps of love and start walking in wholeness. You don't beg to be chosen, you choose you. You don't beg to belong or build a world where you already do. And that kind of self-love, it's not vanity, it's victory. For a long time, she wore pain like a name to Etsy. Every scar, every rejection, every moment of abandonment, she thought it defined her. Until one day, she looked back and didn't just see wounds. She saw wisdom. She saw the strength that came from holding herself together when everything around her was falling apart. She saw how the heartbreak cracked her open just wide enough for light to pour in. Pain didn't make her weak. It made her awake. It taught her empathy. It taught her resilience. It taught her that even when life breaks you, it doesn't mean you're broken. And that shift changed how she saw herself. Not as damaged, not as cursed, but as someone who had walked through fire and came out not smelling like smoke, but radiating the scent of survival. If you've been hurt, don't let that pain become your personality. Let it be your teacher. Let it make you softer, not smaller, wiser, not bitter. Let it carve out space in you for beauty to grow where nothing lived before. For so long, she thought being different was a flaw, a cosmic mistake. The way she looked, the way she felt things too deeply, the way she never quite fit into the mold. She thought it made her less. But the truth is, her difference was the very thing that made her divine. The people who changed the world didn't do it by blending in. They did it by standing out. And she realized that her voice, her story, her presence carried a frequency no one else could replicate. She wasn't here to compete. She was here to complete the picture of humanity. There are things only you can do. Stories only you can tell. Light only you can shine. Being different isn't your burden. It's your brilliance. The world doesn't need another copy. It needs you. And when she finally embraced that, the shame melted into purpose. The comparison turned to celebration. And she started walking like she belonged. Because she always did. She sat at the edge of her bed, heart heavy, scrolling through a world that seemed to shine everywhere, but in her direction. Every post, every face, every voice whispered one thing louder than the next. You are not enough. And for the longest time, she believed them. Believed the mirror when it echoed their words. Believed the silence when the world looked away. Believed that her worth was something she had to earn by shrinking, by pleasing, by contorting herself into what others thought was lovable. But that's not the end of the story. It's not even the middle. Because something happened. Something sacred. She didn't get louder. She got still. And in the stillness, she heard a voice that had been there all along. A voice not outside of her, but within her. It didn't speak in judgment. It didn't measure her beauty. It didn't count her followers. It whispered something radical, something terrifyingly beautiful. You are already loved. And from that moment forward, her story changed. And maybe, just maybe, it can change yours too. She stopped trying to be liked and started loving herself. That one decision didn't just change her reflection. It rewired the very foundation of her identity. And you see, there is a world of difference between being liked and being loved. Being liked is fragile. It bends to opinions, it shifts with moods, it starves for attention. But being loved, especially by yourself, is fierce. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't wait for applause. It simply is. She no longer waited for someone else to tell her she mattered. She looked at herself in the mirror for the first time not to criticize, but to connect. She touched the face she once avoided and whispered, "I choose you," over and over again, even when it felt awkward, even when it felt untrue, until her heart began to believe it. Because love is a language the soul never forgets, even when the world tries to silence it. Every time she walked into a room, she no longer scanned for approval. She scanned for alignment. And then did an idea. If something felt like self-abandonment, she walked away. If someone treated her like a placeholder, she didn't stay to convince them she was worthy of more. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. She stopped saying, "I'm sorry," just for existing. She stopped over-explaining her dreams, her tears, her softness. Because real love, true love, especially the kind you give yourself, doesn't require justification. It's not a transaction, it's a declaration. And she declared it daily. She became her own safe place, her own champion, her own source of validation. She no longer asked, "Do they see me?" But instead asked, "Do I see me?" And the answer more and more was yes. She learned that boundaries weren't walls to keep people out, but doors to invite the right ones in. The ones who didn't flinch when she cried. The ones who didn't compete when she soared. The ones who didn't leave when she needed that rest instead of entertainment. And the rest instead of entertainment. But more importantly, she became that person for herself. She honored her feelings instead of fearing them. She allowed joy without guilt. She allowed sadness without shame. She let herself be a full, messy, beautiful mosaic, not just a polished picture. The love she gave herself wasn't perfect. But it was honest, it was brave, it was enough, and slowly the world started to shift. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. Rejection didn't sting the same. Why? Because she stopped rejecting herself. Comparison didn't steal her peace. Why? Because she knew that her journey, her pace, her scars were sacred. She no longer saw someone else's spotlight as her shadow. She began to see beauty, take beauty, not as competition, but as confirmation that we're all masterpieces in progress. When someone criticized her, it didn't crumble her. It clarified her. When someone loved her, it didn't define her. It freed her, because self-love gave her roots too deep for any storm to shake, and wings strong enough to rise from any fall. Loving herself didn't mean she never doubted, and it meant she didn't abandon herself when the doubt came. It meant when the old voices returned, telling her she's too much or not enough. She didn't give them the microphone. She gave them compassion. And then she gave them silence. Because now she had a louder voice inside. A voice that said, "You are worthy, you are whole, you are enough. You are enough." And every time she chose to believe it, that voice grew stronger. Every time she caught herself trying to be liked, she gently redirected that energy back to love. That was her revolution. That was her rebirth. Her story isn't perfect. It's powerful. But it's powerful. Because it's real. And that's what will change how you see yourself. You don't need to be anyone else's version of beautiful to be radiant. You don't need to be anyone else's definition of strong to be unshakable. You don't need to be chosen by them to be chosen by you. This story, her story, your story, it begins when you stop trying to be liked and start loving the very soul that breathes within you. That soul that has survived every hard thing. That soul that still hopes, still dreams, still fights. That soul that's not broken, but becoming. And when you begin to love yourself, not because the world does, but even when it doesn't, you will unlock a kind of freedom that cannot be taken. A kind of confidence that doesn't need to be loud to be unshakable. A kind of beauty that doesn't fade because it flows from within. You are not too much. You are not too little. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are a masterpiece still being painted. You are a song still being written. You are a light that doesn't need to be dimmed to be accepted. And maybe this is the moment, this very moment, when you stop trying to be liked and start choosing to love yourself again and again, until the mirror smiles back and says, "Thank you for finally seeing me." There came a moment when she stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" The shift was subtle but sacred. For so long, the sting of her past echoed in everything she did, the glances, the labels, the ache of never quite fitting in. Pain had built walls around her worth. She thought it defined her. But then something beautiful happened, and something beautiful happened. She looked pain in the eyes and said, "I see you, but you don't get the final word." She no longer treated pain like an enemy to be escaped, but as a guide with something to teach. And that changed everything. Every scar, every tear, every sleepless night turned into pages of a manual she never knew she was writing. A manual for someone else who might one day be exactly where she was. Pain stopped being a prison and started becoming a passport into strength, into empathy, into unshakable clarity. Unshakable clarity. She didn't have to erase her past to embrace her future. She carried it like a lantern. Not as a weight to drag, but as a light to lead. And in doing so, she discovered the truest, rawest version of herself. Not the girl broken by pain, but the woman reborn through it. For it's a woman reborn through it. For the longest time, being different felt like a punishment. Like she had been singled out, marked by life, painted in bold colors, while everyone else blended in soft pastels. Her reflection in the mirror never quite matched what the world said was enough. But then came the moment she stood in front of that same mirror and saw it not as a measuring stick of comparison, but as a masterpiece in progress. What made her different wasn't her weakness. It was her worth. It wasn't the reason to hide, it was the reason to rise. The very things she tried to change, cover, silence, those were the exact things that made her magnetic. Her laugh that came from deep in her soul. Her voice that shook not because she was scared, but because she was brave enough to speak through the fear. Her journey that didn't follow a straight path, but took divine detours that grew her, shaped her, forged her. She understood now. Her differences weren't detours, they were direction. A call to be a lighthouse in a world full of mirrors. She stopped trying to fit the mold and started becoming the mold breaker. Because her power wasn't in being like them. It was in being wholly, fiercely, unmistakably her. There was a time she walked into rooms and looked for evidence. Evidence that she belonged, that she was enough, that she deserved to be there. She scanned faces, searched for approval in glances, waited for a nod or a kind word to confirm what she was struggling to believe about herself. But those days are over, because now she knows her worth was never something the world had the authority to validate. Her worth was never on trial. It was never for them to approve, and it sure wasn't for them to decide. She stopped negotiating her value with people who couldn't see her vision. She stopped shrinking to fit into frames too small for her spirit. She stopped waiting to be chosen because she finally remembered she was already chosen. By God, by destiny, by the fire inside her soul that refused to dim. Every scar, every stumble, every chapter that tried to break her only carved her name deeper into purpose. She's no longer asking if she's enough. She's walking like she knows she is. Because when you realize your worth is not up for debate, the world has no choice but to adjust its volume to the clarity of your voice. At some point, she stopped bargaining for her worth. She stopped waiting for someone to validate her existence. No title, no relationship, no number on a scale, no job offer, no applause could ever add to or subtract from what had always been true. She was worthy, always had been, always will be. You see, the world tries to sell you your value like it's a product, but your worth was wired into your soul the day you were formed. You don't need to earn it. You just need to remember it. And that remembering, that's where everything shifts. That's when the fear loses power. And the fear loses power. That's when the people-pleasing ends. That's when you stop living for their applause and start living from your knowing. And when she finally saw herself through the eyes of love, she stopped hiding, she stopped hustling, and she started healing.